Reading Lesson 117, Video Part 2. Chapter 27, They're Found. Let's look at today's focus questions, or comprehension questions, so you can keep them in mind for today's reading. How did Tom and Becky escape from the cave? Why was the time of day so important for the children to escape? Why did Judge Thatcher lock the door of the cave? When do you think Outlaw Joe entered the cave? Explain your answer. Do you think Outlaw Joe knew about Tom's secret entrance to the cave? Explain your answer. Writing. What do you think Outlaw Joe did between his discovery of the treasure and his death? Write Outlaw Joe's story. Try to answer the following questions. Where did Outlaw Joe hide the treasure he found in the haunted house? Why was Joe staying in a hotel room number 2? Where did Joe go after the Welshman shot at him outside the Widow Douglas's? What was Joe's doing when Tom saw him in the cave? How did Joe spend the last days of his life? Where is the treasure now? Make your story at least 80 words. All right, let's start today's reading. They're found. Focus question, how did Tom and Becky escape from the cave? Tuesday afternoon came. The village of St. Petersburg still mourned the lost children had not been found. Public prayers had been offered up for them and also many private prayers, but still no good news came from the cave. The majority of the searchers had given up the search and gone back to their jobs, saying it was plain the children could never be found. Miss Thatcher was very ill and almost insane with grief. People said it was heartbreaking to hear her call her child. She would raise her head and listen a whole minute at a time and then lay her head wearily down again with a moan. Aunt Polly had dropped into melancholy and her gray hair had grown almost white. The village went to bed on Tuesday night, sad and forlorn. Away in the middle of the night, a wild peal burst from the village bells, and in a moment the streets were swarming with frantic, half-clad people who shouted, "They're found! They're found!" Tin pans and horns were added to the noise. People moved toward the river and met the children, who were riding in an open carriage drawn by shouting citizens. They thronged around the carriage, joined its homeward march, and swept magnificently up the main street, roaring, "Hurrah!" after hurrah. The village was all lit up. Nobody went back to bed. It was the greatest night the little town had ever seen. During the first half hour, dozens of villagers filed through Judge Thatcher's house, seized the children and kissed them, squeezed Miss Thatcher's hand and tried to speak but couldn't, and drifted out, raining tears all over the place. Aunt Polly's happiness was complete, and Miss Thatcher's nearly so. It would be complete, however, as soon as a messenger got the great news to her husband at the cave. Tom lay upon a sofa with an eager audience around him and told the history of the wonderful adventure. He did not mention Outlaw Joe. Here is the last part of what Tom's audience heard. Tom left Becky and went exploring. He followed 2 passages as far as his string could reach. He followed a 3rd passage to the end of his string and was about to turn back when he glimpsed a far-off speck that looked like daylight. He dropped the line and groped toward the speck. He pushed his head and shoulders through a small hole and saw the broad Mississippi River rolling by. And it had happened at night. If it had happened at night, he would not have seen that speck of daylight and would not have explored that passage any farther. Tom went back for Becky and broke the good news. She almost died for joy when she had groped to where she actually saw the blue speck of daylight. Tom pushed his way out of the hole and then helped her out. They sat there and cried for gladness. Some men came along in a skiff. Tom hailed them and told them their situation. The men didn't believe the wild tale at first. They said, "You are 5 miles down the river below the valley the cave entrance is in." Then the men took the children aboard, rode to a house, gave them supper, and then made them rest till 2 or 3 hours after dark, and brought them home. Before dawn, Judge Thatcher and the handful of searchers with him were tracked down in the cave, and they were informed of the great news. 3 days and nights of Toil and hunger in the cave could not be shaken off at once, as Tom and Becky soon discovered. They had to rest in bed all of Wednesday and Thursday, and they seemed to grow more and more tired and worn all the time. Tom got around a little on Thursday, was downtown Friday, and nearly completely well by Saturday, but Becky did not leave her room until Sunday, and then she looked as if she had passed through a serious illness. Tom learned of Huck's sickness and went to see him on Saturday, but he could not be admitted to Huck's bedroom. Neither could he on Sunday. He was finally admitted on Monday. The widow Douglas warned Tom to keep still about his adventure and to introduce no exciting topic. Pardon my camera. And the widow stayed to see that Tom obeyed. Tom had already learned of the events at the widow's gate. He also found out that the body of Outlaw Joe's companion had been discovered in the river near the steamboat landing. Perhaps the companion had drowned while trying to escape. About two weeks after Tom's rescue from the cave, he started off to visit Huck, who had grown strong enough now to hear exciting talk. Tom had some that would interest him, he thought. Judge Thatcher's house was on Tom's way, so the boys stopped to see Becky. The judge and some friends talked with Tom. One asked Tom if he would like to go to the cave again. Tom said he wouldn't mind it. The judge said, "Well, there are others just like you, Tom, but we have taken care of that. Nobody will get lost in the cave ever again." "Why?" "Because we've closed the cave. I had its big door lined with iron when we finished the search and triple locked, and I've got the keys." Tom turned white as a sheet. "What's the matter, boy? Here, run somebody. Fetch a glass of water." The water was brought and thrown into Tom's face. "Ah, now you're all right. What was the matter with you, Tom?" "Oh, Judge, Outlaw Joe's in the cave." Within a few minutes, the news had spread, and a dozen beatloads of men were on their way to McDougal's cave. Tom Sawyer was in a boat with Judge Thatcher. When the cave door was unlocked, a sorrowful sight could be seen in the dim twilight of the place. Outlaw Joe lay stretched upon the ground, dead, with his face close to the crack of the door. His eyes had been fixed to the last moment on the light and the cheer of the free world outside. Tom was touched, for he knew from now his own experience how Joe had suffered. Tom pitied Outlaw Joe, but still felt an immense sense of relief and security now, a vast weight that had been lying upon him since the day he testified against the bloody-minded outlaw. Joe's knife lay close by, its blade broken in two. The lower part of the door had been chipped and hacked through with much labor. It was useless labor, too, for there was still a rock still behind that part of the door. The knife had had no effect on the rock, and the only damage was to the knife itself. Even if there were no rock, the labor would still have been useless. Joe could not have squeezed his body under the door, and he knew it. So he had only hacked that place in order to be doing something, in order to pass the weary time, in order to keep himself busy. Ordinarily, one could find half a dozen bits of candle in this part of the cave, but there was none now. The prisoner had searched them out and eaten them. He had also caught a few bats, and these also he had eaten, leaving only their claws. The poor man had starved to death. In one place near at hand, a stalagmite had been slowly growing up from the ground, formed by the water dripping from a stalactite overhead. The captive had broken off the stalagmite and scooped a shallow hole to catch the precious drop of his water that fell once every 3 minutes. There was only a spoonful of water in a whole day. Outlaw Joe had buried near the mouth of the cave. Outlaw Joe was buried near the mouth of the cave. People flocked to the funeral in boats and wagons from the town and from all the farms and hamlets for 7 miles around. They brought their children and all sorts of provisions, and they confessed they had a satisfactory time. That concludes today's reading. You have part D, logic. E, vocabulary. Your words are famished, bores, lavish, rollicked, tedious, scoundrel, estimate. 1. When something is considerate or excessive, it is what? 2. When you are very hungry, you are what? 3. When something is boring or tiresome, it is what? 4. When you try to determine size or value, you what? And then don't forget comprehension and writing. All right, independent work begins now. Get busy.